Jamie Clark Soules, in her book, Reading John for Dear Life, breaks today's lectionary reading into 6 acts. And I think this is fitting with the narrative nature of the Gospel of John. Our story from John 9 today is a long one, like the Samaritan woman story we read a few weeks back. And so we're going to break it up and read through it like we did a few weeks ago. There's a narrative arc. There are some obvious antagonists and protagonists. You can imagine a blackout and a scene change at the end of each one of these scenes in a play. This morning, let's be drawn with our imaginations into the story and see the acts that John was shaping as he wrote this, the imaginations he might have been trying to capture. Act 1, the cure, not the band. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed through him. We must work the works of him who sent while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed, and came back able to see. There are a few important plot developments in this story, starting here in the beginning. The disciples incorrectly ask, "Who sinned that this man was born blind?" But Jesus, intent on debunking this old retribution theology, he says, it wasn't the man nor his parents who sinned. There's this idea that God visits judgment upon those who have sinned, and one of the ways that it takes place is through a deformity But Jesus is saying that's not what happened here. That's not what happens at all. That is not how God works in the world, Jesus says. And in the text says, he was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. But something interesting, the Greek does not include the words "he was born blind" at all. That doesn't appear in the Greek. So this little bit was added on to help interpreters understand what might be going on here, but it doesn't appear in the text. It's more correctly translated, so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. It is not that Jesus made him born blind so that others might come to see because of him. Jesus is just at work, regardless. And I think there's a big narrative difference there. I think based on my reading of the Bible, in my interpretation specifically of Jesus, the idea that God causes tragic situations for the gain of others is, I don't think, really theologically true. And some may disagree, and you are welcome to disagree, by the way. But I think the notion that God causes tragedy to happen gives me a lot of questions about the ethical character of God. Would any of us in the room choose to make a person born blind just so that a different person might have something to gain? I don't think so. And so I wonder why God would do that. I don't think God would. Because of passages like this one, I tend to think that the way that the biblical writers are revealing, the thing that the biblical writers are revealing is that they are learning as they go along, that God redeems and brings good out of tragedy, not causes it. And that's an important theological difference that Jesus is intent on showing his disciples here. It's another longer theological discussion for another time, maybe. But we also notice in this act the play between light and dark. Night is coming, so we need to get to work, Jesus says. And then he says something that all Johannine readers ought to notice. I am the light of the world. Jesus uses the term I am for the second time here in the Gospel of John and uses it very intentionally. He also says, I am, and then what does he do? He breathes into the dirt, and the man is healed. Does that sound familiar to the Bible readers in the room? When God breathes breath into the dust and forms Adam, breathes into Adam's lungs and gives him life. God, the God of life, Spirit, the breath of God, heals the man's eyes. Act 2. What will the neighbors think? The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some were saying, it is he. Others were saying, no, but it's someone like him. He kept saying, I am the man. But they kept asking him, then how were your eyes opened? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. Then I went and washed, and I received my sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I don't know. Here we get the start of several reactions in our play. First, the neighbors, then the Pharisees, then the parents, then the Pharisees again, because they can't help themselves. But I think the principle of the act is to say that when people are changed by Christ, it upsets our equilibrium. Because Christ is doing things that we don't expect. These people who saw this blind man begging in the same spot every day doubt it's even him when he can open his eyes. Because of their fear and their doubt and maybe their jealousy or their pride, they won't even celebrate the man whose life was changed by Jesus. It seems like they might want to stand up and jump for joy with the man who is blind, who's now gained his sight. Instead, they doubt it's even him. What a discouraging way to receive the good news of Christ. It's as if they don't even care that Jesus is at work, but they really care about their places in society and the place that the blind man was placed in society. Act 3, the Pharisees. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened. He said, he is a prophet. So our guy has to tell his story once again. Faithfully, he clings to the story in the face of skepticism. He put spit and mud on my face and told me to wash in this famous pool, and now I can see. And the moment he's done telling this miraculous story, the Pharisees suck all of the life out of the room where a miracle was performed and go on about how Jesus can't perform miracles from God because he's performed them on the Sabbath. He must not be from God if he can perform miracles on the Lord's day. Wah, the Pharisees say. First, the disciples are blinded by their theological convictions. Then the neighbors are blinded by their desire to keep the status quo. And now the Pharisees are blinded by their religious rituals. My, how our convictions blindfold us and keep us from seeing the light. Notice the claim that the blind man makes about Jesus. This is a first shot at making sense of who Jesus is. He's a prophet, the blind man says. Who else said that when they were first trying to figure out who Jesus was? The Samaritan woman, who we read about a couple weeks ago. Also, not given a name, described merely by her location. The blind man, not given a name, described merely by something that's true about him. Act 4, the parent trap. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "Ask him. He is of age." Well, the parents are useless. If this is a play, I'm putting these two in the most outrageous clothes with their hair all askew, walking all funny. They are fools from the moment they step onto the stage. But we do see the power that the Pharisees hold. The silly little couple are willing to throw their son under the bus rather than take any claim that might upset the place of power they enjoy in the synagogue. And it's interesting that they claim to be his parents, but aren't willing to admit having seen a miracle or attribute it to Jesus. Again, convictions and security are blinding. To the disciples, after this ordeal, Jesus might have rephrased their bad question they had asked earlier. Jesus might have said, "Who is blind, the man who was born blind or the parents who were born seeing?" We see it's quite likely to have 20/20 vision, but walk around in the world not seeing. As a matter of fact, the person who's blessed in the story is the person who's born without vision, because he has the ability to see the kingdom of God immediately when it shows up. That's a superpower. Act 5, the Pharisees again. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he's a sinner. One thing I do know, that I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to be his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are a disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to the one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. There again, peeking through, is the retribution theology that Jesus condemned from the beginning. It wasn't the result of anybody's sin that this man was born blind, but they can't let it go. And I commend our guy's character here. In the face of the Pharisees, he stands firm. He doubles down even. He even has the fortitude to not concede that Jesus is a sinner for having healed on the Sabbath. He is reinterpreting the law in front of the law interpreters. What courage. I also commend him for his downright sassiness. He says, "What? Do you want to hear it again? Do you want to be his disciples too?" He doesn't mean that. Pharisees claim to be disciples of Moses, reiterating to the audience how their tradition is blinding them to see that God is doing great work in the present, that God did great work with Moses in the past, but God is at work now, in the present. The blind man makes a case for Jesus. He must be from God, he says. He's in disbelief that these guys who are supposed to be men of God have missed the miracle. And he openly mocks them for it. Pharisees, in fear, double down to this notion of retribution theology, and they drive him out. The same Greek phrase for driving out demons throughout the rest of John. They drive him out. Act 6, fade to black. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." The word of the Lord. He hears that the Pharisees have sent the blind man back to the margins, and Jesus goes after him. A not so insignificant fact. I'm reminded of Jesus having to go through Samaria a few chapters back to meet the woman at the well. And her progression from calling Jesus a prophet to God to eventually claiming that Jesus is Lord, just like the blind man does in the story. The point of John is, after all, that people will believe in the gospel of Jesus. This is the second time in John that Jesus reveals his identity in such a big way. And it says something really important about how Jesus judges. Jesus is simply offering life. Jesus is offering light. But those who choose darkness in the face of light are those who are condemned. As we read in the Nicodemus story, and this is judgment, that the light has come into the world, but people chose darkness. That's what judgment looks like. Jesus isn't wagging his finger at anybody. He's merely bringing miracles into the world and saying, if you believe, then you've seen the light. If you do not believe, then you are of the darkness. Our whole story is one where someone who doesn't see gets the sight, and a bunch of people who could see lose their sight. Really, this is a sad story. A story that holds all the tension of loss and life. It lives in the paradox, not unlike the world we often have to inhabit. If this were set on a stage, the play might start in color, transition to monotone. The lights would dim on each character that left the presence of Jesus and the blind man. All while the man who was born blind would grow brighter and brighter, the most well-lit and colorful on stage. All of our cultural and religious and theological convictions place constraints on our ability to perceive what God is doing in the world. The disciples' convictions about retribution, the neighbor's fears about loss of power, the Pharisees' convictions about works on the Sabbath, the parents' convictions about their place in society, all of these things make them blind to not see the incredible life-giving work that Jesus is doing. And it makes me wonder, what convictions do we have that keep the light of Jesus in the darkness? What convictions do we have that blind each of us from seeing the light of Christ? I think God's transformation is happening all over us. But as Christians, we can be some of the most cynical and skeptical about that transformation that God is doing. The people will reject that God is changing. It's like those of us who were born with the ability to see lose it every time we assert one of our conviction that takes life away instead of giving life. Like we become more blind. Like if our life was a play, the lights get a little dimmer every time we turn away or reject the life that God is giving. In favor of our security and our tight-knit theology and our religious comfortability, we choose darkness instead of light. So the worship team is going to come back up. The prayer team is available in the back if you want to have some prayer. But this is my invitation for a congregation who is learning to see. Let's commit to keeping our eyes wide open together and our hands open to the world, paying attention for the life-affirming work of God among us. Let's let go of our staunch traditions and religion and make room for God to do incredible things. Let's give over our fear of what we might lose and of those in power so that we can celebrate the growth and the transformation of those who are on the margins. God, give us eyes, all eyes, to see your kingdom. Amen.